Welcome, heroes and villains, to Fjook Enterprises YouTube channel. This is another conversation with Fjook, and again, I am continuing my quest to interview all game masters that will allow me to. And I am once again doing live, which means I'm in the UK, this time back up in Scotland, and I'll let my guests introduce themselves.
Hi, my name's Steve Ross. I've been a player games master in the role-playing games for about 38 years.
38 years is a long time. Do you even remember how you got into the tabletop role-playing games if it's been that long?
Oh yeah, I remember it quite vividly. It was during what we call secondary school, second year of secondary school. So I was about 14, and it was about 1982, I think, when a couple of friends of mine discovered the Steve Jackson Fighting Fantasy game books, which we all played. And later we sifted through the books to copy down the creature stats and the place names and stuff like that. We started using that information and the rules from the book to have our own adventures. It really kind of took off from there.
So, how did you go from being a player to running the game?
Well, it wasn't long after we started, actually. There was like 4 in our group. So there was 2 of them that were kind of constantly games master. So about a year in, I decided that I liked the creative and storytelling aspects of this new hobby, this new dynamic hobby we found. So I wanted to give it a go. And there was also an aspect of fairness to that as well, because the more games masters we had in the group, the more it gave the other games masters a chance to actually play. So we kind of started a games mastering rota. Each games master would design and run an adventure lasting a week. So like from the Monday to the Sunday, I would be games master in week 1, and it would be like one of the other guys on week 2, and it would rotate that way. So we were playing actually almost every night of the week back then. So a 4 and 5 night a session adventure wasn't hard to complete, and it worked really well.
What systems have you played?
Oh well, aside from that cobbled together fighting fantasy system, which we used for a good few years, we played various paperback systems like Dragon Warriors, which was a fantasy, Maelstrom, which was a kind of historic, but with magic in it. It was a very popular game. And then we played, of course, Jackson's own advanced fighting fantasy system that he produced years later. They were all good systems in their own right, but added to that, I've played the Warhammer Fantasy role-playing game, the very first edition. MERP, of course, which is Middle Earth Role Playing, which was the Rollmaster cut-down version. And of course, Dungeons and Dragons. We say, who hasn't played Dungeons and Dragons? But I've played the very early basic set back in the 80s, and then the new Wizards of the Coast 3rd edition when it came out, and I think it was the tail end of the 1990s. And I've played AD&D 2nd edition as well. But in that mix, we've also got the Call of Cthulhu 3rd edition from Chaosium Games, I believe. And we had some Doctor Who and some Star Trek, both from FASA, which are both now out of print, sadly, and some Star Wars RPG from West End Games, the D6 system. And recently, I've played some Savage Worlds Ultima Forsan, which was, well, a challenge and scary, to be honest. And I've played some Elite Dangerous RPG, which is only about a year old. So it's been a good kind of eclectic mix, I would say.
Of those various systems that you've played, are there any that you enjoy running?
Oh yeah, the Dungeons and Dragons 3rd edition for fantasy is really my kind of favourite. And Call of Cthulhu, of course, for a bit of a kind of more modern horror feel. But I'd like to return back to the Warhammer RPG 2 at some point, because the background lore back then was excellent, even if the game mechanics are a bit clunky and dated. So yeah, I would say those are probably the 3 most favourite at the moment.
On the opposite side of that coin, are there any systems that you won't run anymore?
Well, basically, systems I wouldn't run would be the ones I wouldn't have a kind of feel for the background. I wouldn't have an attachment to the background material. For instance, Vampire the Masquerade, for instance, in Conspiracy X, I've read them. I've played in Conspiracy X, but I couldn't get a handle on the backgrounds material, so I'd refuse to run them just purely on. I don't think I'd do it justice. But the new 5th edition D&D and Warhammer 4th that's come out, I would avoid using purely just because the tone the publishers took with it and the creep of outside politics, coming in. You're being told, how to host a game, which isn't really what the rules should be telling you to do. So for that kind of reason, I would definitely be very reluctant to use those systems. Also some systems that use mechanics to give the player characters a kind of unfair edge, like a second bite of the cherry, and it's just not very heroic, and it breaks the immersion of the world, in my opinion. So I would keep away from them as well. But people are obviously some people like that kind of angle.
Are there any moments of the players completely surprising you that are fond memories that you would like to discuss today?
Yeah, it was the only one that really comes to mind is at the end of a year-long 3rd edition D&D scenario or campaign. At the climax, at the very, very end of it, for the big payoff, the main or lead character had the chance to fight the big bad villain, which he refused to do, which kind of threw me. That was quite very surprising actually. And had they cobbled together like an alternative ending for that. But also when the player character's lord said to him, "Thanks very much for all your help, and how can I reward you? Just name anything. If it's in my power, I can give it to you." All the way through the campaign, he'd been saying, "I really want to marry his sister. She's stunning. I really want to marry her." And he didn't step up and ask, "I'd really like permission, my lord, to perhaps court and perhaps even marry your daughter, your sister." So he just stood there like, no, everything's fine, my lord. So that was twice. Surprised twice at the end of one campaign. Player characters, man, you can't live with them, you can't kill them.
On the other side of that, is there any moments of everything going according to plan that you would like to discuss?
It was way back in the late 90s, actually. I was running Star Wars, the D6 system, and I decided that the party of 4 players, I would split into 2, and I would run separate adventures for each of them. But they were all sitting in the same room. So I had to juggle the time and the action in each adventure almost perfectly, just to make sure that one was left in a cliffhanger with something to think about while I did the bit with the next one. We're talking about 15 minutes per side, and it worked fantastically well. So that really just kind of come off sweet as you like, and the players said they really enjoyed it. They could listen in on the other side, see what they were doing without chipping in, and vice versa, while thinking about what they were going to do in their own thing. So that's really the kind of only time and adventures went so smooth. Because as you know, adventures tend not to survive first contact with the players. They just throw curveballs and go off at tangents and stuff. So that was really the fondest memory I've got of that.
My usual penultimate question, and the penultimate question for this video: do you have any advice for your fellow game masters out there?
Basically, just to be fair and measured in your approach. Don't pander to your players, but don't victimize them either. Start small with a good amount of detail, expand it as required, and then just build on the successes that you have in the area. But I'd also advise them to be true to the game world as well, and don't be afraid to be harsh to their player characters. If they do something really stupid that would have serious consequences, tell them that. But if they insist on still going ahead, then deliver the consequences. Even if that means, one of them will die. Warn them up front about this style of play, of course, before you start a session is probably a good idea. that gives them an idea how you will be running things. Yeah.
As we end the interview, is there anything you're part of that you would like to shout out?
Not at the moment, actually, because things are pretty quiet due to the lockdown and so on. But later on, once it all starts lifting, I'll be looking at getting some more adventure sessions going and maybe turn my hand to producing some adventure modules, hopefully for publication. But we'll just need to wait and see how that plays out or not.
Wait, do you have adventures published?
No, not yet. This is a new angle I'm hoping to get into. So I'm going to need to contact various companies who hold licenses for certain games and ask if it's all right to submit materials, for publication, which I think is quite difficult to get. But I'm hopeful that, there's a couple of new starter companies, like Spider-Man Games, who are doing the Elite Dangerous RPG, and they might be open to it. So we'll just need to wait and see. But yeah, hopefully I'm going to start, being able to do that, and like I say, hopefully maybe get a few of them published, if they're good enough, of course.
Well, if that happens, I'll add the link to it to the description of this video, even though it will be ancient by then. But
well, if it comes off, I'll certainly be in touch and let you know.
I hope everyone that watched to the end of this video likes, comments, and subscribes. And I will see you in the next video. And you were a great guest.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me, Fjuk. It's been a pleasure.